Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 6th YouTube session of the Pixel Project's 9th International Women's Day edition of the Read for Pixels campaign. My name is Anusha Kandasavam. I'm your moderator for this session. Through Read for Pixels, the Pixel Project is collaborating with 13 award-winning and best-selling authors to raise awareness about violence against women and to raise funds for the Pixel Project to keep our efforts to end violence against women alive and kicking. I'll be telling you more about the Read for Pixels fundraiser, all the exclusive author goodies we have a little later. But meanwhile, if you want to find out more about the Pixel Project, please go to our website, www.thepixelproject.net. All right, so for this session, we have a very special guest. And for the Read for Pixels discussion and Q&A session, we have the fabulous, amazing YA fantasy author, Swati Teerdhala. So here's Swati. Hi, Swati.
Hello.
Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I'm going to give everyone a little introduction, even though I'm sure they don't need it. So Swati is the author of the Tiger at Midnight series, which has appeared on both the Barnes & Noble's and Bookright's most anticipated novels list. She is passionate about many things, including how to make a proper cup of tea, the right ratio of curd to crust in a lemon tart, and of course, diverse representation in our stories. So aside from generously donating her time today, Swati has also donated some exclusive gifts to the stash of author goodies we have set up as treats for donors on our Read for Pixels Rally fundraising page. And these are available to donors worldwide. So I'm going to tell you what they are. Goodie number 1 is the Tiger at Midnight book plus art bundle. So Swati is giving away 2 of these exclusive signed and personalized book plus art bundles, which means one each to a Read for Pixels donor anywhere in the world. So each bundle comprises 1 first edition hardcover of The Tiger at Midnight, 1 first edition hardcover of The Archer at Dawn, 1 first edition hardcover of The Chariot at Dusk, so these are 3 books in the series, and 1 limited edition 8x10 art print of the main characters of the Tiger at Midnight trilogy. I'm so excited about this. And then, so there are 2 of these available. The second thing is have a 45-minute Zoom call with Swati. So Swati has graciously donated 1 45-minute Zoom session to be claimed by a Read for Pixels donor. Swati will be happy to chat about the art and craft of writing, about publishing, books, your favorite Tiger at Midnight characters, and more. The session will be conducted in English, and it is open to individual donors, book clubs, and libraries. And remember, there's just 1 of this session available, so donate now to book the slot with Swati before it's gone. All of these are available on our Rally Up fundraising page. I'm going to tell you more about how you can get your hands on them a bit later, so stay tuned. We have had a bit of a slow start to our fundraiser. We've only raised $970 towards our $5,000 goal, and it's already the third week of the campaign. So please do give generously before the fundraiser ends on the 15th of April. All the funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Okay, one last thing before we move on to the reading. You, the audience, you can participate. You'll be able to ask Swati your questions. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account, and you can type the questions into the chat box, which is on the right side of your YouTube screen. And Regina, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me, and I'll read them out to Swati. Okay, so over to you, Swati. Tell us, what will you be reading today?
Yes, so I'm reading a passage from a chapter in the middle of my first book, The Tiger at Midnight. You can kind of see problems with virtual backgrounds. So The Tiger at Midnight it's a story that follows 2 characters. Kunal, who is this very loyal, dutiful soldier of the Red Fort, and Isha, who is a legendary rebel, but her identity is not known to anybody. And their paths cross one night as Kunal is looking for the person who has assassinated his general. Isha is his suspect, but we find out whether she did it or not, and what happens, and what happens after they start their paths cross and the cat and mouse game between them begins. So this passage is when they cross paths. And they have a very interesting discussion debating their 2 different viewpoints of the war that is ongoing in their countries.
Right.
So, right before this, Isha claims that she is the one who murdered the general, though she is not. And you find that out early, so it's not a spoiler. But she has claimed it just to see what Kunal will say. She pulled her hand away first, turning to follow the path. But something stilled her steps. She looked back. Hello?
Yeah, you're right there, Swati?
Oh, yeah, sorry, I couldn't. Let me start again.
Yes, go. Start again. Go on.
Okay. He glanced at her, startled at the confession. Isha felt her eyes go wide, betraying her own surprise. Once the words were out of her mouth, she had no idea why she had wanted to say it, why she had lied. Maybe he would have believed her if she had told the truth, but it was better to watch him to see what he might reveal. Why would you admit it? He seemed puzzled, a frown on his face as if expecting a trick. Isha shrugged, her mind racing. Well, you asked, she pointed out, her brow furrowing. Maybe it's because my friends say I like to be contrary. Maybe it's because I'm trying to confuse you. She felt the words take on their own life as she looked at his face. Maybe it's because you seem to like me and I wonder if you will, even after knowing. That hit too close to the truth that was beating in her heart. Kunal shook his head. You admitted it. Whether I like you or not has no bearing on what I must do now. If you killed the general, you must be brought to justice. A look like regret passed across his face. Even if I owe you a debt. With just a few words, the rising fire in Isha's belly flickered out and anger replaced it, warming her limbs with a different kind of heat. Must I? For killing one person when he slaughtered thousands? Her face was stony. This was the behavior Harun always said would get her killed. She was challenging a soldier who had the advantage on her. The last thing she should be doing was provoking him, but she couldn't help it. You've probably killed more people in one fortnight than I have my entire life. Where is the justice in that? Whoever I killed was on a battlefield. Irritation bloomed on Kunal's face, darkening his brow. It was by the rules. You slaughtered him in his bed. Well, these are my rules. I'm not a soldier. I'm the Viper. Kunal's face remained impassive, but his fingers began tapping. Even rebels have rules they must follow. I'm not associated with those rebels. Kunal flashed the crescent blade's pin in front of her. She tried to snatch it, but he caught her wrist, tucking the pin away. We've always suspected that there was a connection between the Viper and a rebel group. I always thought the stories couldn't possibly have come from one person, but now, having met you, don't pretend to know me, soldier. If you were told to become the Viper, he said, looking thoughtful, that would be different. You wouldn't be at fault then. The vicious part of her wanted to squash that thought. Have you considered that I may have chosen to become the Viper? Took it on out of my own sense of duty to my people? You, of all people, should understand that, soldier. Isha fell back into her hatred, and it settled around her like an old blanket. It was a relief to feel it, instead of whatever he had been making her feel minutes ago. No, because I have this face, I can't possibly be in control of my own destiny. I used to think so too. Your king, she spat the word, seems to think so too, removing all women from military service. She stepped back, only to find herself even closer to the corner of the room. The thick brocade of a tapestry brushed her arm. I'll not feel a shred of remorse for sending that general to the pyre. He has sent hundreds, thousands of families to weep at the pyres of their loved ones. He's one less monster roaming the streets. One less soldier with the power to destroy families like her own. And you don't owe me any debt. I would rather be sacrificed to that tiger in Thage than be helped by a bronze-armored, yellow-bellied fort soldier, Isha finished. Something warred on Kunal's face, as if two halves of him were struggling to make a whole, fighting for dominance. She eyed him warily as he moved around the door. In seconds, he had broken the latch to the window so that it was stuck in place. They were now on different ends of the room, Kunal moving to stand in front of the door and Isha in the corner opposite. You're right, Kunal said. She stared at him, shocked. No matter how much I hate to admit it, he was a harsh man. Cruel when he could have been merciful. Tough when kindness would have worked just as well. He may have been my mentor, but even I knew he wasn't always a good man. He agreed? What was she supposed to say to that? She had an outline of him in her mind, bronze and blood. But now the gaps were filled in with gray, an unknown, and she hated it. He shook his head. But it still doesn't matter. My orders are to take you back. You'll face a trial, and justice will be meted out. That's how I will repay my debt. You'll not be killed under my watch. Isha burst into laughter, and he looked up, startled. A fair trial? Ignorance truly is bliss. Her tone was biting. I will get no trial. You're full of lies, she hissed, feeling more like her namesake than ever. I will be barely tossed a glance before I'm thrown into a cell or left for the buzzards. Gone are the days when Johnsons respected women and viewed them as equal under the law. In 10 years, centuries of equality were stolen from the women of Johnson because of your king's greed and fear. Kunal looked surprised, so he hadn't thought she would be so apprised of Johnson and its politics. She took pleasure in that, in surprising him. She was more than one thing. Not only am I a woman, but I'm a murderer, apparently. The men who become soldiers are not those who value women, and definitely not a woman who has managed to discard their notions of female fragility with the slice of her knife. Once again, his brows rose, and she knew she was giving away more than she should, revealing her cultured and educated upbringing, her passionate interest in what had happened to Jansa. You don't know those men. They're not all bad. But they're not all good. All you need is a few bad grapes to ruin the wine. Kunal opened his mouth to respond, but shut it quickly, as if he realized the truth in her words. He sighed deeply and glanced away before running a hand through his hair. It had grown longer than the traditional short soldier cut, giving him a different look than usual. His sharp, amber eyes snapped to hers, and Isha thought she could read the emotion in them. His face warred between annoyance, frustration, and something else. It seemed he didn't know what to do with her. The feeling was mutual. And that's just a little snippet of the conversations that Kunal and Isha have throughout the book. Just debating equality, the differences in their countries, and what a woman's role is in their world.
Yeah, and that's pretty awesome because it's right at the beginning of the book, right? And it gives us a really great snapshot of their preconceptions about each other as well. It's pretty cool. Yeah. So I'm going to jump right into the questions. Now, we just met Isha, and she is a pretty fantastic female character. And you have some pretty awesome girls and women in your book. There's Isha, there's Princess Reha. They are complex, compelling. They're very human characters. They have agency, but they're doing their best with the cards they are dealt with in their life.
Mm-hmm.
So your Tiger at Midnight series is inspired by Hindu mythology and history. Historically, there have been Indian women warriors, just like Isha, who is a notorious assassin, like you said. And of course, there are some incredibly powerful women in Hindu mythology. However, culture and society tend to erase the role of women in history and overlook stories of women or paint them as meek or weak or even as villains. Are there any historical or mythological women who have inspired you or your characters?
A lot. I can't necessarily pick one in particular, but growing up, all of the stories of women in mythology and folklore, I'm thinking of Sita, Draupadi, they all had different roles, and often they were traditional ones, but there was steel underneath their skin to be powerful, loyal, fierce queens. That was something I always thought about. I thought about how fiercely they protected their family and their people. So yeah, a little bit of a bunch of different female characters from mythology and folklore. But yeah, not one in particular.
Oh, cool. Anyone in real life? Just curious.
No, actually, no one in real life, though I will say there's a little bit of all of the women in my life in the stories I write, just because I have two older sisters. I have, of course,
Yeah.
my mom is probably one of the strongest women I know, and I put a little bit of them in all the stories as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Do you think that writing fiction inspired by historical or mythological women can be a way to take back the narrative or rewrite women back into history?
Yes, and there's a current trend of this, I would say, for Greek mythology, and even recently we're seeing that more with Hindu mythology with books like Kaikei, and I believe this came out a number of years ago, The Palace of Illusions.
Hmm.
Um, I really enjoyed both, and I've enjoyed a lot of the other Greek retellings as well. And yes, I really think this is reclaiming those stories, telling them from a female point of view, a different perspective. It
Yeah.
changes the tenor and the tone of the story, and it gives
Yeah.
it a new life. If you think about like I think the most common version of this, probably the one that's most relatable for most people, is the Odyssey.
Mm.
There's so many stories within that where you think, okay, Odysseus is the this big guy, he's the main character, but what
Yeah.
about Circe?
Yeah.
And we got to see Madeline Miller's version of that, of telling Circe's story, and it's a very different one than we had been told so far.
Yep.
And continuing to kind of dive into that to draw out more of those narratives, not just from historical figures, but thinking about, well, what's the modern perspective of this?
Mhm.
What are other ways in which, in Cersei's case, you have a woman who's considered a witch for being different? I mean, I think that's kind of what it boils down to, that there's a lot of nuance there.
Yes. Yes.
um, how do we tell those stories and reclaim those stories even in a modern perspective and context too? There's there's a lot of ways to do that. I think we're just scratching the surface, and I'm for one very excited about it.
Yeah. Yeah. Me too. I think we can look forward to a lot more of these kind of stories, and it's pretty cool. I think it really opens your mind up to different perspectives and different ways of looking at things. I
Yes.
think. Yeah. And speaking of uh, that, and like in the scene that you read just now, but I mentioned preconception. So all genres have their share of female stereotypes and tropes, uh, including YA fantasy. Now, your characters can also be considered people of color, which is quite rare in SFF, and it comes with its own set of stereotypes and tropes. So it's probably not a stretch to deduce that the risk of stereotyping is tripled when genre, gender, and race intersect. How do you break stereotypes and subvert tropes to create a female character of color with agency while she deals with the world around her, including sexism, misogyny, violence against women and girls, especially if she doesn't fit into culturally prescribed gendered norms, including appearance and behavior?
Yeah. Some of it's conscious, some of it's unconscious. I think there's one level where we tend to write characters that we see, at least in the first couple of tries. So I think it's also being conscious. So there's yeah, the unconscious level is what we see in society, what we see in media is what we kind of take in.
Mhm.
So I actually had to spend a little bit of time in my revisions and really think, well, is that the best story for Isha? Is that a story that really pulls out the complexity of who she could be? Um, Isha is one of those characters who jumped into my head very fully formed. She had a strong voice and a strong POV,
Mm.
but sometimes you can get swayed by notions of a genre, like you mentioned, and maybe you think, okay, I need to send her in this direction. And it took some thinking, and I had great critique partners and my editor to really question some of those and say, well, that's what would normally happen. But what if we pushed her this way? What if we actually treated her as a real person with complexity and
Mm.
nuance, and sometimes she makes really bad decisions.
Yeah.
Sometimes she um, overreacts, and I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest thing, is allowing women in stories to act like humans, and instead of just these paragons of virtue or um, the stereotypes, the whatever, is really thinking, how do we make how do we make these characters real more than
Yeah.
anything else?
That brings me nicely to my next question, which is, did you ever feel any pressure by pressured by gender and cultural stereotypes to make your female characters like Isha likable or relatable? Or did you ever get any flack for not making a female character likable enough?
Oh yeah.
You did?
uh, yeah, I would actually say my very first draft of The Tiger at Midnight, Isha actually, so this is not a spoiler, but in the first book, you find out that Isha is framed for the murder of the general.
Yes.
In my very, very first early draft, she wasn't. She actually did murder him. Like, she was a very morally gray, incredibly complex character. And ultimately, I shifted that just because it didn't fit the larger story I wanted to tell about duty and the paths that we are put on versus questioning the paths that we belong on. But there was a moment where I did think to myself, aside from writing the story that I think is best, will people judge her? Will people not like her just because of this act? Even though she is an assassin by trade, that is her her
It's her job.
profession. Yeah, it's her job.
Yeah.
But still, I thought, are people going to say, "Oh, she actually killed somebody," even though it's her job? And that's one kind of big example. But yeah, definitely in smaller ways, I think, oh, if she says that or she's a little harsh, um, is she going to be judged? I think it's very much, if you think about the behavior maybe that we hold ourselves back as women, sometimes I might not say something. Sometimes it's a good thing not to say something, but I think it applies the same way as,
It's self-censorship though, right?
yeah, that's exactly the right phrase. Yeah, that's the right word for it. And I think with books, the you do get feedback like that. Sometimes people will say, "Oh, she was unlikable because she was just a tad bit selfish in like one scene," and that's normal. We're all just humans. Sometimes, or if a character makes a bad decision, oh, she should have known better. She should have been smarter than that. Definitely a consideration, but ultimately, I really had to hold my ground and think, well, this is people don't have to be likable. That's not the main goal of a woman. We're
Yeah.
not here to be consumed. We're here to exist. So it's a difficult thing, but yeah, I definitely thought about that and then had to put it aside during all my writing and revisions.
That's very interesting. Yeah, and I'm glad you did, because, like you said, it makes the character human, right? Because we all make bad decisions. We're all not very nice sometimes. We can't all be wonderful, amazing women all the time and paragons of virtue, like you said. That's just not a person, right? Yeah. All right. So in this world that Isha lives in, she's a pretty badass assassin. There are women who are leaders, they're warriors, and they're rulers. But in Kunal society, women have a certain prescribed and gendered roles. Do you think it's better to write a world where everyone thinks it's normal that all genders are equal and that female characters have power or drive plots forward, or basically an ideal world? Or do you think people should write patriarchy and sexism to reflect the real world?
That is such a great question.
What do you think?
I think we need both,
Okay.
because the reason why I say that is there are types of media, of storytelling where, especially for younger generations, I would say, yes, we want to showcase it as a norm. It is normal. It is the way things should be. It is the way it is. Especially for, I would say, children's books in general, being able to show that it's not weird and not introducing some of these concepts. If a lot of children don't have any of these concepts, it's something we learn. We very much learn from society. But on the other hand, I would also say children grow up quite early. They deal with a lot of different things. I remember, I'm Indian American. In middle school, I would definitely get microaggressions and questions and things that made me uncomfortable. And I quickly had to learn that I didn't look like other people, and I had to understand why did people even care? So I think a balance, because sometimes you need to be able to escape and to see the world for what you hope or wish it could be or what you know it should be. And sometimes you need fiction where it tackles the real issues and really reflects the world as it is. And I don't feel like I can say this helps more than that, just because different people respond to different types of stories.
Yeah.
I know as a child, I read a lot of sword and shield fantasy, and you didn't
Yeah.
really see. Yeah, it was my
Sword and
favorite.
sorcery. Yeah, I love those. Yeah.
And yeah, you definitely. And I started to read more of those stories that had women in them, and they would tackle some of these issues. And I'd already kind of knew at the age of 10 that, oh, hey, girls are told they're supposed to be this, or they're supposed to be that, or they can't be this, or they should only do that. So being able to see that in a story in a different way helped me imagine myself in that way. And then when I got older, being able to see the reality of the world in maybe a more contemporary setting, and see how someone my age or someone older than me tackled some of those in a contemporary setting, that also helped me when I was at the right stage to really think about, well, how do I address this? How do I deal with the world as it is? So it's a bit of a cop out, but I'm going to say both.
Yeah, that's a very good answer, I think. I do agree with you. Yeah, and the stories can really are able to teach us what the world is and what the world should be, basically, right? So, okay, going on with women characters, your books definitely passed the Bechdel test with the inclusion of complex relationships between women. But why do you think many SFF authors still have trouble writing stories that pass the Bechdel test, despite the fact that there are so many more things that women talk about other than men?
Hmm. It's also a great question. Why do I think that still happens? I think it's just what we're used to. And I think especially if people don't look to question the stories that they're used to, if they keep writing the things that they see or have seen before instead of really pushing to reflect society more as it is, that's when you kind of get the same stories. I think the biggest thing for something like a TV show, the reason why this happens is the writer's room isn't diverse enough. You don't have enough women. You don't have enough women of color. Um, you don't have enough, just different representation of all kinds. And without that, it's hard to get that nuanced experience into stories. I would say that's the biggest thing. That is my guess is that's really the reason more than anything is just exposure to those stories and awareness. And that's me saying that out of assuming the best intentions, really.
Okay, what can you suggest anything for writers who want to write female conversations and relationships realistically?
My biggest thing is think about your friends. You guys don't. Like, I talk to my friends about the most random things. I'm not. I think the Bechdel test also one of the things is to not have conversations just between two female characters about a man.
Yeah.
And they talk about other things as well. And I've always thought about that, and I'm like, my friends and I talk about everything, politics, TikTok. Like there's so many things that just really representing what is life like. We occasionally talk about our partners and that kind of stuff, but especially as we've gotten older, there's so much more in our lives. So really just representing the people and the women Um, if you're even thinking like your mom will come over and berate you for literally anything. You didn't make
Yeah.
your bed. That's a more accurate representation than your mom coming over and being like, oh, you're not married yet. I mean, that happens. I won't say that doesn't
Oh, yeah.
happen, especially as an Indian.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
there's just
you
so much
would
more
think that
nuance.
it's like pretty obvious, right? But I don't know. People still don't get it. Hmm. Anyway, let's move on. So we've been talking a lot about your female characters. Let's talk about the men. Um, though there are misogynistic characters in your books, the male and female relationships between the main characters, especially, are quite equitable, and some of your male characters are respectful of women about of their thoughts and decisions. Your story has a pretty classic enemies to lovers storyline, and in many stories like this, the female lead tends to be treated badly by the male lead, physically or emotionally. But your male main character, Kunal, is in no way abusive or toxic. Was this a conscious choice on your part?
Yes. I love the enemies to lovers trope, but I would agree sometimes it can be interpreted in ways that are not always as equitable or as respectful. What I really wanted to do with the story was to tell a story about two people who have ideological differences.
Mm-hmm.
So, and having ideological differences does not mean that you can't be respectful. Does not mean that you will or you have to denigrate each other. You can respect somebody and disagree with them.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because this trilogy is a young adult, there's these two young adults who are really coming to terms with what they were told
Mm-hmm.
throughout their lives and what they actually believe now. So they're opening their eyes to the world at large. And their relationship, their encounters with one another are what really start that process.
Mm-hmm.
Um, in that case, it's not about, oh, I don't agree with you as much as, oh, I never thought about it that way. And yeah, I really wanted to make sure that it was more about that and more about how do they reconcile the pain in their past, their larger differences, their differences as human beings, rather than saying, let me throw in some of the um, you know, I don't want them to be nasty to each other just because they're enemies. I want them to really think about, well, we're just different, and how do we reconcile those differences?
Yeah, I like that. It's a pretty intellectual way they approach it, where, like you said, you think about it, about what the other person said. They might feel like, oh, what are you saying? But then they do think about it and think, oh, it's just we were taught differently, we were raised differently, or our cultures are different, or that kind of thing. I like that part of their relationship. Yeah. So, all right. Do you think that reframing how stories describe men away from hostile and toxic stereotypes towards complexity and even vulnerability can be one of the ways that science fiction fantasy writers can break away from these toxic tropes that promote this toxic masculinity and the dehumanization of women?
Yes. Yes, totally. Um, Kunal is my version of this, though I didn't realize I was doing it until halfway through my first draft. Uh, he's a strong, loyal soldier, very much a trope.
Yeah.
But I took a lot of inspiration from him from, you know, actually from Arjuna, from the Mahabharata, which is
Mm-hmm.
this Indian epic.
Mm-hmm.
And Arjuna is this character. He's one of the five Pandava brothers, and there's a part of the Mahabharata where it's called the Bhagavad Gita and it's essentially, I think, a lot of people, a lot of Hindus treat it as the scripture, and it's one of the many different scriptures that they read and learn and kind of absorb the lessons from. And the Arjuna is the one who kind of goes up to Krishna, and he asks him in the middle of this large battle. He is this warrior. He's a soldier. It's his duty to fight, but he's about to fight his cousins. And he
Yeah.
asks Krishna, "Am I doing?" He's basically asking, "Am I doing the right thing? Is this what I should be doing?" Um, and so I took that was a little bit of my inspiration. Is even in the religion and culture I was brought up in, I was never told anything is black and white.
Yeah.
There's always nuance, there's always gray, there always is, even when you have your duty, and even with morality, there are shades. Um, I really thought about that, and I wanted to bring that into this idea of the soldier who had never seen the shades of gray. And what happens when he does? What happens when he starts to be exposed to more and questions? And as I started to finish that first draft, I realized that in some ways it was also tackling toxic masculinity, this idea that there's only one way to be a man, that there's
Mm-hmm.
only one way, and part of that one way is to subjugate women, to be dominant. Might is right, and that's actually a phrase I use in the book as the usurper king is like that's his new way of ruling, is might is right.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to kind of deconstruct that and think, well, is that true? Well, Kunal, what's Kunal's journey? Is he going to go through all of this and kind of really believe that? Is he going to meet other people and not see their perspectives and not open up? And um, that vulnerability of being able to listen to other people's stories, to say, maybe I was wrong.
Yeah.
It's definitely something I wanted to showcase.
Yeah. That's really awesome. I never linked Kunal and Arjuna until you said it just now, and I was like, yeah, because I love that story. I also heard it as a child, the story of Arjuna, and it's very emotional, really, and the way it's told, right? And the doubts that he has, and he starts questioning his duty, his basically like everything he's learned in his life. Yeah, so that's so awesome, Swati. You are a great writer. All right, so speaking of writing and stories, stories are one of the most powerful ways of bringing about cultural change. The line between consent and coercion isn't very clear in fantasy books, whether it's epic fantasy, urban fantasy, paranormal romance. Certainly, some subgenres of fantasy, such as grimdark, for example, they still use violence against women as a catalyst for a male character's development or as a shorthand for showing how brutal the world is. Do you think tackling this is an issue that writers in the genre have started have been doing more successfully in more recent years?
The genre, I think, that's actually tackling this very well, and I've seen grow tremendously in addressing consent is romance. So I read a lot of adult romance, actually, and um, that has been something I've noticed is a strong theme, is always making sure on both sides that there's consent, very clearly verbal consent. And also if there is tragedy, if there is anything painful in someone's past, not using it as a character, um, not using it as a catalyst as much as just a way to to describe, if that makes sense. So I think the best way to say it is, I don't know, in fantasy, I think we still have a way to go. And I'm just being very honest, because there's still a lot of fridging. The term is fridging. You fridge the girlfriend. You always have to do something to the girlfriend to,
Yeah,
unfortunately, further the main character, who's usually male's, journey. And to this day, I'll watch something and I'll call out to my husband. I'll be like, she just got fridged.
yeah,
And I still think we have a way to go. I
yeah,
think there's been some improvement, and you see that a lot. There's a lot of fantasy writers who are women and who are changing it. And the biggest reason I've seen change is because we have more representation from women in fantasy stories. But I think that old trope is not gone yet, and I think there's still work to be done.
yeah. You mentioned romance just now. You're currently writing a YA romance comedy, which is both a change in genre and a change in pace for you. Uh, what do you think romance as a genre can teach the other genres about writing about violence against women, like specifically of sexism and misogyny and consent, like you said?
So much. I think romance handles female stories so beautifully, because it really tells it's all about, romance focuses on the growth of a woman, of a female character, really, not for love, maybe because of love. Love is the catalyst.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually don't think that's a bad thing, because we have love in all different forms, and this just happens to be romantic love. But a lot of times, the romance genre just focuses on women and what they want, the stories that they have in their hearts, the challenges and problems they go through, the things that bring them joy. And I kind of mentioned this before, but I think, first of all, the best way to write a woman is to just treat them like human beings who have desires, who have fears, who have, you know, random quirks, and not in this stereotypical way, but just in a very natural human way. I think romance captures that really well. Romance also doesn't let tropes get away with stuff. I would say is you see every trope known to mankind in romance. But these days, you will never see it in any trope in a disrespectful way.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is very thought out, and I think romance writers are really think very intelligently about this, and they tackle tropes, and they break down tropes, and they subvert them, and they play with them. And yeah, I think there's a lot to learn from romance. Um, but it's really just about, a corner of writing and of storytelling that's really focused on the stories of women is really, I think, where it succeeds.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, so then, do you have any suggestions to SFF authors who wish to include violence against women in their books? How would they go? How do you have any suggestion how they should go about it?
I would say number one, ask yourself if that's the best way to tell the story.
Mm,
And I don't mean that to negate experience of any survivors or to say that it doesn't happen,
yep.
but just that oftentimes the default is to use it as a shorthand.
Yep.
Shorthand for tragedy, for pain, for suffering. And I think that really reduces the actual reality of it to something that isn't, it reduces the reality of it to something that isn't accurate. Like there is so much nuance, so much more to that portrayal. And if you're going to do it, you have to be willing to go deep into it. And that doesn't necessarily mean on the page, but I mean doing your research, understanding that it's not just like a few lines you can put in a book and just say, that's it, I'm done.
Yeah.
And I think if you're using violence against women to show more of a historical setting, do your research. I don't think anyone's going to deny that that has been a pervasive thing throughout history in many different cultures and societies. But making sure it's accurate, making sure that it also it's cohesive, it's comprehensive, if that makes sense. So really all that really boils down to is do your research. Don't use it as a shorthand. And really ask yourself, is this the best way to tell the story? And if so, am I willing to do the work to represent what this is really like for the people, for the women who undergo it? I think would be my biggest thing.
So, because of the nature of the Tiger at Midnight series, the characters do live through some violence, like the kind of violence that comes with war and rebellion, and there is some violence against women, though it's never on the page. How did you find a balance between showing violence as an integral part of the story and not showing it gratuitously?
Yeah, that was actually something I thought about a lot. Is yes, there are hints at it. There were mentions of it,
Yeah.
but first of all, it's young adult, and I wanted to make sure that we were focusing on the story of Kunal and Isha, and not necessarily getting into the larger kind of the dark side of war, because that wasn't necessarily the story I was telling, but it was part of it. It also didn't come about naturally. And I wanted to address it and to really say, like, yes, this happens.
Yeah.
We're not denying it, but at the same time, I didn't want it to be the focus more than anything. That was the main thing is, address it, but not wanting it to be the main focus. And I think the way to do that is to acknowledge that these things happen.
Yeah.
And if it's not part of the story, to not belabor that, and to treat it with respect.
Yeah. I think that's a very good way to approach it. Yeah. All right. We actually have a question coming from the audience, so let's see if I can put it up. This is a question from Misty306, who is one of our regulars. Hi, Misty. So she says, Middle Eastern fiction across all genres are getting more recognition with all of the recent publications. Which books have you read that you recommend for us to read? And I think maybe not just Middle Eastern or Eastern fiction, maybe anything that you've read.
Yes, actually, I do have a recommendation for Middle Eastern. Recently, I read The Stardust Thief by Chelsea Abdullah, I believe. I thought it was so good. It took me back to the fantasy I used to love as a kid. It was a vibrant, new, different culture. I got to learn more, and it had jinn and women with swords, which is one of my favorite story tropes, and lots of really fun magic. And I really enjoyed that. I'm waiting for the next book to come out.
Okay, we'll go check that out. The Stardust Thief. right? Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and I seem to remember reading something. I think it was an interview that you did where you said that you were a huge fan of the Green Rider series.
Yeah. A long time ago. Oh, it's been a long time, but yes,
Oh yeah.
in middle grade, yes, I was a big fan.
Oh, cool. Yeah, we had the author on like a few
That's
years ago.
amazing.
Yeah, we had her. She's awesome. I mean, she's been in the industry for so long and she has so much experience. And she's pretty. Yeah, go and check that out, guys. Oh, and Misty says, I just finished the Stardust Thief and the Adventures of Amina Al Sirafi.
So I have that. I have the Adventures of Amin Al Sarafi literally on my coffee table. I haven't started it yet, but I'm super excited.
Okay, these sound cool. I haven't read them. I'm gonna go check them out. Okay. All right. So back to one of my questions. Um, Here we go. So geek culture in general, including science fiction and fantasy, has had its share of critics saying that it's still too male dominated, despite there being a rising number of prominent, well-respected, and well-known female authors. Plus, there's still plenty of hostile, misogynist, and sexist behavior by male geeks towards female geeks. What do you think needs to be done to make geek culture as a whole, whether it's comics or gaming or books or even cons, more welcoming for women and girls?
Yeah, I think things are changing, but it's slow. I personally I've gone to Comic Cons, and it's one of the best ways to engage in fandom and to meet other geeks and to have a great time. But yeah, I think the biggest thing is to make sure people feel safe and to have actual community standards, to have moderators, to make sure that there is um, goodwill that's built. And that can be done through a variety of different ways that fit the specific communities. The way that they like to interact, or what they're interested in talking about, but there need to be guardrails, and I think just acknowledgement that we're all human beings and we all just want to share in our love of the same things. um,
Yeah.
I think that's one step. The bigger thing is to really the pipeline of getting more women involved in the creation of comics, in the creation of video games, in the creation of these communities. That really changes things because a lot of times it's from the ground up. You need to have more diversity and representation from the ground up, and that's when you start to also see a difference.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. I guess. Yes. I mean, yeah. I agree. But it's a long road. It's slowly.
Yeah.
It's improving slowly. Yeah. I guess so. Yeah. And I must apologize everybody for a hot second there. I couldn't remember the name, Tamora Pierce, who is the author of the Green Rider series that I mentioned to Swati just now. Oh, okay. Wait, is it not Tamora Pierce? Wait. Anyway, go and check out the Green Rider. I am very bad at remembering names.
I yes, I love Tamora Pierce
Yeah.
and all of her books. I'm probably she is one of the first. Her books are some of the first I read as a child in fantasy, and she was a real introduction to fantasy for me. So
So we've kind of come to the end of our session almost. All right, but I'm going to ask you a two-part question here. So you have been very incredibly supportive of our Read for Pixels campaign and our anti-violence against women work as a whole. This is a bit of an obvious question, but why do you support the cause to end violence against women?
I've always been a big advocate for women and women's rights since I was very young. I I never understood why there was such a difference in how women were treated or in just between humans. So, I mean, working to end violence against women, I think, is a no-brainer. It's a central part to lifting up women and to giving them more agency and ownership. And yeah, as writers, we tell stories about the world, about people, And often those stories can, most stories, they reflect good and bad and in between. And we open up windows and doors and to the reality of human experience. And um, there's a responsibility in that. And I, believe that that responsibility carries to the real world as well. And advocating for ending violence against women and advocating for lifting them up and supporting them. So to me, no brainer, but also, I write stories about women. So I believe that they should be treated equally and fairly.
Yep. All right. So, what do you think that authors can do, authors such as yourself, can do to help with the cultural change needed to eradicate violence against women and girls?
I think it's in the stories we tell, is to continue to make sure that we are building in that representation, building in that nuance, that complexity, not letting things not letting stories or media that we see get away with the same old tired tropes or tired ways of telling women's stories. So like standing up and saying, that's not correct. Here's my version. We talked about this a little bit earlier, is even saying, taking Greek mythology, which was written thousands of years ago, and saying, well, what if we actually looked at it this perspective? We've had thousands of years of hearing it from a man's perspective. What about from a woman's? What would that actually sound like? How do we get more voices out there? I think authors in particular can do this and have the ability to find those stories and raise up those stories and promote those stories.
Yeah.
And stories are how we change how we think about the world. It's how we learn about the world, from whether we are 5 years old to whether we're 105. It's a main way of communicating human experience. So as storytellers, we do have a strong responsibility to challenge the old ones, the old stories, and to tell better, newer ones that more accurately reflect the society we want to be.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Okay, well, that was our last question, folks. Thank you so much, Swati, for talking with us we've been talking for about an hour. That's pretty amazing. So I'm gonna put myself back on screen again. Hi, everybody. Before we go on, I really must apologize. My amazing producer Regina has sorted me out. Tamara Pierce wrote the Alana series. Kristen Britton wrote the Green Rider series. And we have actually interviewed both these two wonderful ladies. So go and check both those videos out.
And I'm actually a fan of both
Yeah.
series, actually.
Yeah, they're both
so
amazing.
highly recommended.
All right. Thanks, Regina. All right. So thank you, Swati, for the answers. And thank you, everyone, for coming and watching and asking questions. Now, before we wrap up, in case you missed the beginning of the session, I'm going to tell you about the amazing goodies that we have on our Rally Up fundraising page for donors, and including stuff that Swati has generously donated. So here we go. The first bundle is the Tiger at Midnight Book Plus Art Bundle. There are 2 of these to give away. Each bundle comprises first edition hardcovers of the Tiger at Midnight. Oh, do you have it?
I have the art. I was just going to show off the art.
Oh, okay, yeah. So the Tiger at Midnight, Archer at Dawn, and Charge at Dusk. First edition hardcovers of these. And this limited edition art print of the main characters of Tiger at Midnight. Oh, that's so awesome. So cool. Yeah, so there are only 2 of these available for donors anywhere in the world. So go and check it out. And then the next thing that Swati has donated is a 45-minute Zoom call to be claimed by a Read for Pixels donor, where Swati will be happy to chat about the art and craft of writing, about publishing, about books, about your favorite Tiger at Midnight characters, and more. This session will be conducted in English, and it's open to individual donors or book clubs or libraries. And there's just one of these available, so donate now to book the slot. And we also have tons of other stuff available on our Rally Up page. We have stuff from authors such as Alison Littlewood, Vanessa Riley, Sonali Dev, Clolis, Angela Yuriko Smith, Adiba Jaigrida, Carol Goodman, Leanna Renee Heiber, Romina Gerber. We have stuff, bundles from Entitled Publishing, Black Spot Books, and more. And like I said before, we've had a pretty slow start to our fundraiser. We've only raised $970 towards our $5,000 goal. And the fundraiser ends on the 15th of April. So please do give generously, as all funds go towards the Pixel Project's work to help end violence against women. Now I'm going to put up a little slide. There we are. So that's the link, which our producer is also going to be sharing in the chat box. So you can donate to get these goodies on Rally Up. It's R4P Rally Up's IWD 2023, and Regina's going to put the link in the chat box in any second now. And if you want to find out more about Read for Pixels, we have more author sessions coming up. Go to our Read for Pixels page, bit.ly/readforpixels. That link is going to go up as well. And I have something else to tell you. The Pixel Project's Shirley Jackson Award nominated and Audie Award nominated first short story anthology called Giving the Devil His Due is out. And it's sort of like the Twilight Zone meets Promising Young Women. Pretty cool stories in there. The anthology is now available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook for order from major booksellers everywhere, including Amazon Kobo, Google Play, Book Depository, and more. For audiobook fans, we're very excited to tell you about a special International Women's Day deal. You can download the book for just $8 from now until 18th March, which basically means you have 1 day left for this deal. And it's available from audiobook retailers worldwide, including Spotify, Barnes & Noble, Google Play, and anything else. For paperback fans, we have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors to offer an exclusive limited edition book plate for early bird buyers. Each author will sign 16 book plates, and it'll be on a first-come, first-served basis. Each book plate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. Now, if you want to find out more about the anthology, how you get your hands on the book plate, visit the link going in the description box. It's on our Giving the Devil His Due page. All net proceeds from this sales of this anthology go towards our work, keeping our Read for Pixel Project's campaigns and programs and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. And if you want to find out more about violence against women, about the work that you can do to end it, go and visit the Pixel Project's website, www.thepixelproject.net. All right. So I think the last thing to do is, Swati, you have an announcement.
Yes. So we mentioned the romantic comedy that I'm writing next. It's called The Boyfriend Wish, and it'll be out next February. So a little bit of a wait, but if you're interested in learning more, you can check it out on Goodreads.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll wait for that one to come out. I'm sure it'll be great. All right. So that's it from Swati and me. Thank you very much, Swati, once again. And thank you everyone for watching. And we'll say good morning, good evening, good night, and wherever you are in the world, and goodbye.